Hello and welcome to Bossing Vaporwave with Mr. F. Just kidding, of course, it's Bossing English, and today we're going to be looking at OCR A-Level English Literature, Paper 1, the extract question for Shakespeare. We're going to be looking at Hamlet, and we're going to be looking at soliloquies and how to handle this question, which is tricky enough if you have multiple characters, but if you have a single character and it's a soliloquy, how do you handle the dramatic effects, which is part and parcel of the language analysis that you're doing for that. All right, well, let's start with a refresher of the AOs in OCR's own words. So for this one, it's AO1 and AO2. AO1 is 25%, articulate informed, personal and creative responses to literary texts using associated concepts and terminology and coherent written expressions. So that's this up here. Let's do something nice and do a circle. And then 75% is, okay, look at that, boom. This is what you come for, isn't it? This is what 500 plus subscribers are here for, the drawing with a mouse. 75% analyze ways in which meanings are shaped to literary texts. That's just quite vague, isn't it? So perhaps if we scroll down to the actual mark scheme, and because we're only really interested in the top end of that mark scheme, we'll look at this. AO2, a well-developed and consistently detailed discussion of effects, including dramatic effects of language, form and structure. So even though the question says language, we should be thinking about form and structure as well. Excellent and consistently effective use of analytical methods. Consistently effective use of quotations and references to the text, critically addressed, blended into discussion. Then AO1, excellent and consistently detailed understanding of text in question with critical concepts and terminology used accurately and consistently. Well-structured, coherent and detailed argument, consistently developed with consistently fluent and accurate writing in appropriate register. Now, there are other videos where I talk about some of these terms, like appropriate register, and the well-structured, coherent and detailed argument. As you can see, my incoherency is on top form today. I've underlined critical concepts here for a reason, which we'll come back to in a minute. So let's go to this other snippet that I've taken from some of the resources provided by OCR for teaching staff. AO1 and AO2 are also assessed in the A-Level Shakespeare extract question. AO1 demands an informed response, one that's supported with evidence. In the A-Level extract question, rather than a proposition being provided, that's what we get in Part B, you come up with a personal opinion about what the main thrust of the scene is yourself. How are the characters feeling? What is the mood? How is this dramatized? For instance, asked to discuss the scene in which Hamlet challenges Gertrude following the staging of the mousetrap, a candidate begins with, both the mother and son meet in an excitable, inflamed mood. This is matched by the language, accusative and imperative on his part, angry, frightened and perplexed on hers. You can then move on to AO2, looking at how the language, form, dramatic conventions and structure support what you said. Here a candidate brings in language and structure to support what they asserted above. As the scene closes, Hamlet takes control and expresses his feelings about the murder and incestuous marriage, almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother. The almost jocular rhyme focuses attention on the play's key terms, mother, kill, king, marry, brother. The snarling plosives suggest that Hamlet suspects his mother of complicity in the murder. This leads into a formal speech in a more academic tone, filled with images of nature perverted and heaven offended. Okay, I think this is another one of those actually written by the exam board and not actually a real candidate, because that's very, very impressive. And I seem to remember reading that in one of their prepared materials where they give a model answer. So don't be alarmed by that. Make sure you use specialist terminology when you're discussing how language, form and structure, AO2, bolster your personal and creative arguments, AO1. Using literary terminology is another strand of AO1. For instance, rather than saying Prospero solves seemingly unsolvable problems in The Tempest, call him a deus ex machina. Boom. In addition, if you merge AO1 and AO2, your answer will cohere. You don't have time to mention all the techniques used in the extract or the play, but you do have time to mention the techniques that help bolster, support the argument you're making. I think that's really useful information that you're getting in those 2 paragraphs. Now, this is a bit tricky. Sometimes the language form and structure only goes so far in shaping meaning. Context needs to be brought in too. AO3 context also feeds into AO1 and AO2. We can see context as a thread, a mood, or a character trait, for instance, that links the devices a writer is using. So yeah, they're not actually asking for specific AO3. They're saying that sometimes that's a mood or character trait can be linked to the context in which the play is set. One way of kind of bringing that in would be under critical concepts, and that's why I underline that as part of AO1. I think critical concepts allows for some kind of contextualization that lends weight to your argument and maybe to the evidence that you're providing from the extract, whereby you are bolstering it, supporting it with that contextualization. They give an example. One way we might think of this is if we're dealing with hierarchy and, in the court of Elsinore, the way that Hamlet responds to Claudius, breaking the hierarchy, or Horatio, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern respond to Hamlet, reminding us that he's a prince. And the different layers of that hierarchy in the royal household and from outsiders would be one way of contextualizing the language that's being used to refer to those people, or the use of thee and thou as opposed to you, for instance. Okay, a good example of how to handle a soliloquy in this instance would be Hamlet's first soliloquy from Act 1, Scene 2. So following his public appearance and discussion with Claudius, his stepfather, Gertrude, his mother. And we've seen some of the jagged kind of exchanges that have been happening there with the puns and the barbed language and the wordplay and the quick wit. And then so that's the public face of Hamlet. And then what Shakespeare is doing here is giving us the private face of Hamlet. So this really, in terms of dramatic effect, is a scene of characterization. And we're hearing the inner turmoil of Hamlet being made manifest for the audience to fully understand what is consuming this character. So he's being presented to us in a kind of raw, unmediated version, where we've seen, which, the juxtaposition with the public strained face of Hamlet, where he has to put on an act, so he's already playing, keeping up appearances between mother and stepfather, to the private, unmediated, no filter, and we get that kind of unmediated access to Hamlet's inner thoughts, his inner turmoil, and all the things that are consuming this young prince at this particular moment of his life. That was my initial thoughts, and I have an old copy of Shakespeare, the New Penguin copy of Hamlet. It's always good to have different copies of it. The one that OCR uses is the Collins version, so I would definitely recommend getting hold of the Collins version, because that's the one they draw the extract from. It's called the Alexander text, which is what they're using there. I always used to teach with I think it's New Cambridge Schools version, which I always thought was very, very good in terms of presenting the text, and would still recommend that as a go-to. But it doesn't hurt to have other copies of the text. The reason being, they'll give you different notes on the text. So if you want to go deeper into the text, that's always useful. So here's my New Penguin edition, which was edited by T.J.B. Spencer and introduced by Anne Barton. And it says here, the importance of this soliloquy lies in its establishing Hamlet's personality and revealing his mental condition. The syntax is abrupt. The sentences progress by increments and interruptions, Exclamations are followed by clarifications, questions, and imperatives. That's your dramatic effect in a nutshell. I'll read it again. The syntax is abrupt. The sentences progress by increments and interruptions. Exclamations are followed by clarifications, questions, and imperatives. So it's all there, isn't it? Everything that you want to say from the dramatic effect of this characterization of Hamlet at this particular moment of the play, at the very start, when we need to find out what he's really like, what's bothering him, is given to us through a soliloquy, because how else would we get that true face of Hamlet? So let's dig a little bit more into that with some specific examples from this soliloquy. We might start with the emotional outbursts which punctuate this soliloquy from start to finish. We get use of apostrophe, the O, which is an emotional exclamation, someone who's unable to contain their emotions, so it comes out in this kind of outburst. We get repetition, which is a kind of verbal tick for Hamlet. We get that in the first line with the 2-2, but oh God, God, fie on it, fie. This kind of repetition is almost a sense of disbelief being expressed by him, which takes form and takes shape in that repetition. Exclamations, oh God, remember we can't analyse the punctuation which was put in afterwards, but we can imagine that oh God, God is exclaimed. We don't need the exclamation mark to tell us that. We can tell because it's a short exclamatory phrase that it's being said at volume. Then we get these non sequiturs that don't seem to be linked to anything, that it should come to this. Heaven on earth must I remember? Rhetorical question. Why she, even she? And oh God, repeated at the end, having been said at the start. So there's lots you could pull at there in terms of showing us a character in utter turmoil, finally being, after this traumatic meeting with Claudius and Gertrude, able to express these things that are concealed within when he's in the public court of Elsinore. We also get shown that he's an educated man. For me, I'm always intrigued by this. 2 solid flesh would melt Thor and resolve itself into a Jew. It seems to kind of link into maybe the kind of scientific discoveries and metaphysics that of the time. There's something intriguing about that, because it sounds like something a metaphysical poet would write, where they draw on like discoveries in the science to make poetic conceits. Of course, he's just talking about suicide. That he's too. The physical nature of being is such that he feels everything, and he would like to be less physically present and have his. It's a clever metaphor where if everything dissolved into dew, i.e., he no longer existed, no longer had physical form, then he wouldn't feel as he feels now in the aftermath of his father's death and having seen his mother remarry to Claudius. I mentioned educated. We know he's at Wittenberg with Horatio, and we see that with the classical references. When he says Hyperion to a Satyr, when he mentions Niobe, when he says no more like my father than I to Hercules, these show us that he's an educated prince who is aware of the classical references that he's making. We get hero worship. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a Satyr. It's an extreme hyperbolic comparison being made, and shows us the hero worship that Hamlet has for his father. We get the melancholy nature of the prince at this moment, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable. So like a series of nouns. They're not nouns, they're adjectives. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. So we get this kind of this listing of 4 adjectives to describe the melancholy state he finds himself in. We see that with the negative imagery that introduces the corruption theme. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. So themes emerge. The melancholy, suicidal, thinking Hamlet, the Hamlet that's aware that of the corruption that he's surrounded with. We could explore that. We also get, as an emerging theme or characteristic / trait of Hamlet, is the misogyny which first appears in a very generalized way. Frailty, thy name is woman. This is like an aphorism. It's like a true statement that a philosopher might make. And he directs it at all women. So he goes from the general and he moves to the specific. And he says, focuses in on the fact that a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer than his mother did. Why she, there's a link there, even though it seems to be interrupting himself. There was a kind of continuity. And then finally, oh, most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. There's a criticism there, citing biblical writ, that actually this is incest. To marry the father's brother is seen as incest in the Old Testament of the Bible. Again, you could also use that to show his educated and Christian nature or background. A really good one here would be the fixation that Hamlet has with time. He obsesses over the shortness of time between father's death and mother's remarriage. And this really, it's like, if you want to use a fancy word, an idée fixe. It's a French phrase to say an idea that completely consumes his mind. And we see that because it's all the way through this soliloquy, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not two, and yet within a month, a little month. And you could explore the use of little there to say that even 30 days for him is no time at all. Within a month, oh, most wicked speed, it's still playing on the idea that the time between death and remarriage is far too short for him. And I think there's something obsessive, this obsessive nature of Hamlet, these fixations that he has, these verbal tics, these emotional outbursts, these self-interruptions, they all show a character educated, in turmoil, in disbelief, racked with feelings he can't really put into words. He's struggling to elucidate or articulate all the different feelings that he has, and we see that with as the note I quoted from earlier, with the abrupt syntax, the increments and interruptions, the exclamations followed by clarifications, questions and imperatives. They're all the product of a mind in utter turmoil at what he is experiencing. It's all too much for him. There we are. They're all dramatic effects. They're all characterizing Hamlet and showing us what he's really like. Of course, we would be zooming in and analyzing some of the language, or using words like apostrophe, or exploring themes or critical concepts like misogyny or melancholy, which is a big Renaissance concept as well that you could explore. Do have a look at that. The Art of Melancholy, The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton, which is a text that I think postdates Hamlet, but shows us what Elizabethan thought was, or Jacobean thought was on this theme. Hopefully that has been useful for you. It's just to show you that even if you're given a single character speaking, there's lots you can say about the dramatic effects that are happening there. And do remember to contextualize this, because what's significant about this particular soliloquy is that it's the private side of Hamlet being exposed after we've seen the public side of Hamlet with all he's had to suppress in that meeting with Claudius and Gertrude in the public court of Elsinore. You know what to do. Like you like, subby sub, and I will be back with more felicity anon. Bye for now.